Hello, buddy. Welcome back to the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'm starting off yet another Chillin' Scares reaction marathon for you guys. And the first video I'll be reacting to today is 6 most disturbing rare mental disorders. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road and in the bag.
Dissociative fugue. Dissociative fugue is a rare condition where a person forgets everything about themselves and their identity. However, what separates a fugue state from something like amnesia is that the person suffering from this condition is not confused or scared by the sudden memory loss.
Oh, that is just sad right there. I'd be freaking out if I lost my memory. Seriously.
Instead, they're fully aware of their surroundings and often travel to some faraway location almost as if they're searching for something. In some cases, the patient can even start a whole new, fully functioning life under a brand new name, which is probably the scariest symptom of this disorder. It's almost like the person you recognize as your own self takes a back seat while someone else controls your body. These second lives can look so normal that unless someone knew the person before, they'd have no idea they were speaking to someone experiencing such a disturbing condition. Someone can also spend months trapped as this alternative self, living a brand new life, while to their loved ones they're a missing person. Now, we still don't have a clear picture of how such a disorder is even possible, but we do know that it has a strong correlation with amnesia and, more importantly, dissociative identity disorder, which is also known as multiple personality disorder. As for what causes such an extreme disorder in the first place, the reasons can range from severe mental and physical trauma to the use of psychotropic substances and, in some cases, even as a side effect of dementia. Fortunately, there hasn't been a single case of dissociative fugue becoming a permanent part of someone's life. All patients eventually come to their senses, only to find themselves in an unfamiliar location with no recollection of how they got there. However, while some regain their memories shortly after emerging from their fugue state, others remain unable to recall anything about themselves, which is what happened with Jeffrey Allen Ingram. On the 10th of September 2006, Jeff woke up on a sidewalk in Denver, Colorado. Now, of course, waking up on the sidewalk would be distressing enough on its own, but Jeff had to face an even harsher reality. He had no memory of who he was and how he got there.
It was early in the morning. I'm not sure at what time. It looked like the sun was just starting to come up, so there's some light there. I was half picking myself off of the ground, and I had no idea where I was. I didn't recognize no buildings, no streets, no nothing.
That'd be a scary thing to go through. Because me personally, I would think it's almost like your body is on autopilot, but you're not in control of it. That's the only way I could describe it, basically. And then when you're in control of your body again, it's just like, oh, okay, where am I at? That's a scary thing to even think about.
He frantically searched his pockets, hoping to find an ID or any other document that had his name. Unfortunately, all he found was $8 in cash. After failing to remember a single detail about his past, Jeff turned to the people in the vicinity to ask for help. Sadly, they were less helpful than he had hoped. To them, Jeff looked like a crazy person on drugs.
And it was extremely, extremely terrifying. They turned me away as if I was, someone that lives off of the streets or was some kind of a psychotic person, like you don't know where you are kind of thing.
Without any other option at his disposal, Jeff started working toward the most logical solution he could think of at the time, finding a hospital. However, he didn't have enough money on hand to get a cab. So he set off on foot and eventually found a hospital after walking continuously for 8 hours. But due to his complete memory loss, even getting an appointment at a hospital was a challenge.
And I ended up walking into Denver Health. I walked up to where they take the admissions and stuff like that, and said I need help. They go, okay, well, what is your name? I said, I have no idea. That's what I'm here for. She says, well, you got to put something down. I said, I don't know my name. Like, you guys don't understand. So they just gave me a name and stuff there, John Doe. Still drilled me. What's your name? I said, I don't know. And I'm in tears at this time. I'm shaking really, really bad. I can barely stand up.
While in the hospital, the doctors tried everything they could, from medication to therapy, to help him recover his memory. But even after 6 weeks of treatment, Jeff had zero clue about his identity. The only option he had left was to make his face as famous as possible so maybe someone from his previous life could identify him. So on October 22nd, he went onto national TV to ask for help.
I don't know. It's hard to explain. I just try to look for information in my head, and it's not there.
It's just blank.
Yeah.
What's the hardest part about that then? About not knowing?
It's very stressful, yes.
Can you do me a favor? Can you take off your hat so we can see what
Mm-hmm.
you look like without the baseball cap? Because people may remember you that way. And do you know if you always wore glasses or you just have no idea?
I have no idea.
Why don't you take those off as well so we can see what it looks like without the glasses?
Luckily, his fiancée, Penny Hansen, recognized him and immediately contacted the police. She also gave them pictures of the two together to prove that she was telling the truth.
Jeffrey Ingram hugged his fiancée today, who just 24 hours ago he couldn't even identify. He didn't even know himself.
As it turned out, Jeff was a 40-year-old machinist from Olympia, Washington. On September 6th, he went out to visit his friend in Canada who was dying of cancer, and that's when he went into his fugue state for the next 4 days. The stress of knowing that a dear friend could pass away at any moment due to terminal illness was likely what triggered the disorder. However, it's important to note that this wasn't the first time something like this happened to Jeff. He had experienced the same issue twice before, with him going missing for 9 whole months back in 1995. Though he did regain his memory quickly after waking up from that fugue state. Unfortunately, the same did not happen in 2006. As romantic as it would have been, he didn't regain his memory after seeing his fiancée after nearly 2 months. And it took years for him to readjust into his old life. In order to prevent such confusion in the future, Ingram ordered GPS shoes and had his identity information tattooed on him. He also started wearing a zip disc with medical information around his neck. The most unsettling part of the incident, however, was that he remembered having 2 children who died in a car accident.
And what came out of that?
A few clues that I might have worked in New York or in the New York area. That I did have a family.
That you did have a family.
A wife and 2 kids, and they were all killed in a car crash somewhere by a drunk driver. Maybe in the New York area, we're not sure.
But according to Penny, Jeff never had any children before. As to why he remembered something so traumatizing even though it wasn't true, we'll never know for sure.
I kind of agree with chilling scares right here. It'd be like losing a friend can probably trigger an emotional stress state in your mind. And then when you try to like go to sleep, you start having a mental breakdown or something, almost like sleepwalking state, and then you end up somewhere else. Because that's what I was thinking about. It'd be like when they wake up, they just don't remember where they came from, you know. That's the only logical thing I could come up with. I hope people get cured from this condition. It's just sad to think that there's people out there that go through this. All right, let's get to case number 2.
Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to find and cancel active subscriptions? Signing up for them always seems to be the easiest thing in the world, yet canceling them is...
Hold on, he's got a sponsor, so I'm going to skip over that.
Alien hand syndrome. Alien hand syndrome is exactly what it sounds like. A person loses control over one of their hands, usually the left. This quote, alien hand, moves on its own, often in unpredictable and creepy ways, making the patients believe that the hand attached to their body is not theirs. What makes this condition even more unsettling is how the alien hand can directly contradict the other. Imagine flipping on a light switch only for your rogue hand to immediately switch it back off. It can also be violent towards the patient, with some reports of the affected hand trying to choke the patient, which is a truly disturbing thing to experience.
Oh, yeah, I bet it would be disturbing. I'm not going to be making any jokes here, but if I was the doctor and somebody came in with that condition, I'd be trying to strap down that arm so it won't be moving around like crazy. But let's just continue on and see what's causing this condition to start.
And while we don't fully know why something like this occurs, we do know that it's more common in people who have undergone split brain surgery in the past. For those who don't know, our brain consists of 2 hemispheres that are connected in the middle with a bridge of nerves. Our motor functions are also split between the 2 halves. The left brain controls our right side, while the right brain controls the left. More importantly, the left hemisphere governs our ability to speak. It's where our language centers are housed, the part of us that can articulate thoughts. In a sense, it's the voice of who we are. However, during a split brain surgery, the corpus callosum, which is the bridge that connects the two hemispheres, is cut to treat severe drug-resistant epilepsy. And as the theory goes, split brain surgery removes the right brain's ability to communicate its intentions with the left brain, which, as we discussed, controls speech. In silence, the right brain remains conscious, aware, and functioning, but with no voice to express itself. And since it doesn't have a way to vocalize its intentions, the right brain often resorts to moving the hand under its control. A real-life example of this is Karen Byrne in New Jersey. She had the split brain surgery when she was 27 years old to treat epilepsy, and it was a success. That is, until her left hand started moving on its own. In an interview, Karen explained the first time this happened during a doctor's visit. Quote, "Dr. O'Connor said, 'Karen, what are you doing? Your hand's undressing you.' Until he said that, I had no idea that my left hand was opening up the buttons on my shirt. So I started rebuttoning with the right hand, and as soon as I stopped, the left hand started unbuttoning them. So he put an emergency call through to one of the other doctors and said, 'Mike, you've got to get here right away. We've got a problem.' She also explained how it now hinders her day-to-day life, stating, 'I'd light a cigarette, balance it on an ashtray, and then my left hand would reach forward and stub it out. It would take things out of my handbag and I wouldn't realize, so I would walk away. I lost a lot of things before I realized what was going on. Worst of all, the left hand sometimes lashed out against Karen and started attacking her out of the blue.' Ultimately, if the split brain theory is true, it brings up some unnerving questions about who we are. But as creepy as some of the implications are, I doubt we'll get concrete answers anytime soon, since this disorder is so rare that it's hard to study. Plus, our brain is way too complex to fully understand with our current medical technology."
Yeah, he's right. Our brain is way too complex, and you try to explain what is going on to me, I'll be like, can you repeat that slower and way I understand it? And also, you would think that you would have surgery on your brain between that bridge that they were talking about for like epilepsy or something. You think, okay, it's success. Nothing's going to happen, right? And then all of a sudden, your arm starts to act out crazy. So in a way, the brain is starting to send misfire signals to your other arm just to make you do things that you do not want to do. That's the only way I could explain it. I never even heard of this condition before. But I hope one day that when medical science improves, they can have a surgery performed on somebody like her and, get her hand to stop like twitching or knocking stuff out of her hand. But yeah, the brain is just too complex to where if you hit something with the scalpel, you might damage it even further.
Cotard syndrome. Cotard syndrome, also known as Cotard delusion or walking corpse syndrome, is a rare mental disorder where a person believes that they're dead, don't exist, or have somehow lost their internal organs or blood. It was discovered by Jules Cotard, a French neurologist who first described this condition in 1880. He described this disorder as a previously unrecognized form of depression, noting that those affected exhibited many traits commonly seen in individuals with severe depression. They would stop taking care of themselves, become emotionless, and drive zero enjoyment out of activities they used to enjoy before. But later studies confirmed that the walking corpse syndrome wasn't a disorder on its own. Instead, it was the result of extreme depression and anxiety leading to psychosis and schizophrenia. Near-death experiences can also have a similar effect, where someone regains consciousness after getting very close to death or even dying for a few minutes before getting resuscitated by doctors. Something like this happened to Army veteran Warren McKinley, who got in a horrible motorcycle accident. And while he survived the accident, the resulting stress and head trauma in his frontal lobe caused him to develop the walking corpse syndrome.
What I felt was, what's the point?
And that's how you felt emotionally. What's the point?
Why I was at Headley Court and they were trying to help me and
to rehab you.
And I was just...
You felt like a ghost, didn't you?
What's the point?
Like a ghost, dead man walking.
More modern examinations have also discovered a strong correlation between Cotard syndrome and damage to parts of the brain responsible for recognizing faces. So, when an already anxious person sees themselves in a mirror, they can't recognize themselves and reach the delusional conclusion that they must be dead. Researchers also mapped out the 3 key stages of Cotard syndrome. And the scary thing is, it starts off as practically indistinguishable from regular depression in what's known as the germination stage. During this stage, the patients experience symptoms like insomnia, loneliness, and the loss of interest in both their home and work life. The next stage is known as the blooming stage. This is where the symptoms quickly mold into something that can be recognized as Cotard syndrome. During this stage, patients often claim that they have missing or rotting body parts, that they're already dead, or in some severe cases, that they don't exist anymore. The final and the most terrifying stage of Cotard syndrome is called the chronic stage. At this point, the delusions of death become ingrained in the patient's mind, leading them to refusing any and all help from others and denying their reality. Once a person reaches this stage, it becomes extremely difficult to rehabilitate them, since in their mind, what's the point? They're already dead.
Okay, I'm at loss of words for this condition. Even if they said, "What's the point? I'm already dead," I'm still going to be like, "No, I'm taking you to a psychiatrist just to give you the once over." And if they tell me that your friend's brain is messed up to where they're acting like they're like walking zombies or something, then I'll be asking, is there any treatments available for this condition, or is there a surgery you can do?
And while there are some exceptions, most patients at this stage end up in one of two distinct camps. For about 55% of the patients, the main symptom of Cotard syndrome is a delusion of immortality. They believe that they've lost vital organs. However, they're also still mindful enough to notice that their body is still moving. Under normal circumstances, they'd see the proof of their body working fine and come to the rational conclusion that they still have every vital organ. Unfortunately, the psychosis caused by Cotard syndrome leads them to a very destructive realization that they're functionally immortal. This was exactly the case for the 43-year-old woman whose condition led to Jules Cotard discovering the syndrome, someone he referred to as Mademoiselle X. In his case report, Jules described Mademoiselle X's condition in detail, stating, "Mademoiselle X affirms she has no brain, no nerves, no chest, no stomach, no intestines. There's only skin and bones of a decomposing body. She has no soul. God does not exist, neither the devil. She's nothing more than a decomposing body and has no need to eat for a living. She cannot die a natural death. She exists eternally if she's not burned. The fire will be the only solution for her." Unfortunately, Jules didn't have any way to treat this woman at the time. She later passed away from starvation after refusing to eat anything. And while the people suffering from this form of Cotards might find some solace in the delusion that they can't die, the second group's life becomes an unending nightmare. The most disturbing case of this I came across involved a 65-year-old retired teacher referred to as Mr. B in the case report to protect his privacy. Let's call him Brian for simplicity's sake. Sometime in early 2010, Brian started experiencing a multitude of negative symptoms, including sadness, poor socialization, anxiety, decreased sleep and appetite, ideas of worthlessness, and guilt. However, it wasn't long before these symptoms developed further with delusions of catastrophe, nihilism, and persecution. He also began feeling like he had lost every asset and had become extremely poor as a result. But things were about to get a whole lot worse, because soon after, Brian started saying that his organs weren't working anymore. His brain had stopped functioning and his house had developed cracks and was going to fall down. This feeling of nihilism became so unbearable that Brian tried to end his life. Fortunately, his attempt was unsuccessful and he was admitted to a hospital. Family members also found a final note in his room which revealed that he wanted to end himself because he feared he might spread a deadly infection to the people in his village. Even after being admitted to the hospital, Brian attempted to end everything 2 more times before becoming fully convinced that he was already dead and refusing to eat. The only silver lining in this case is that doctors were able to diagnose his condition as Cotard syndrome on time and treat him accordingly. This was a significant development, especially when you consider that unlike 140 years ago when Jules Cotard first discovered the syndrome, treatment options were virtually non-existent. And while Cotard syndrome is not officially recognized as a mental illness in official manuals like the DSM-5 and the ICD-10 by the World Health Organization, I came across several studies that suggest treating the syndrome is possible. And not only possible, but increasingly effective today with methods like electroconvulsive treatment and psychiatric medication. And with advances in brain imaging technology, we can hopefully gain a deeper understanding of the causes of Cotard syndrome and find ways to prevent it completely.
Well, I'm glad they are able to treat this disorder.
Ebom syndrome. Ebom syndrome, also known as delusional parasitosis, is a mental health condition where the patients believe that they're infested or infected by some kind of insects or parasites. These can include things like worms, mites, bacteria, and even mice in some extreme cases. It's a type of delusional disorder where the person suffering from the ailment is convinced that they have these pests crawling under their skin. And while Ebom syndrome doesn't cause any direct harm to the patient's body, it can lead to them hurting their own body while trying to remove the parasites. Some can take things even further and spray themselves with harmful pesticides, resulting in life-threatening breathing issues. Luckily, medication and treatments like antidepressants and cognitive behavioral therapy can help with reducing the symptoms to a more manageable level. That being said, there is a harsh and sad reality here. Delusional parasitosis is defined by an unshakable false belief. Those suffering from it are utterly convinced that parasites are invading their bodies, despite all evidence to the contrary. As a result, most affected individuals do not accept treatment. This is exactly what happened with a 53-year-old woman in Colombia in 2017. By the time she sought medical help, she had already been living with ebom syndrome for 5 years. Her symptoms included depression, constant itchiness, and even visual hallucinations. She also explained how she'd been using various toxic chemicals to clean her skin and clothes in an effort to get rid of the parasites living in her body, but nothing worked. In addition to all of this, she also brought a sample of what she claimed to be the parasites. But testing these specimens showed that they were nothing more than dried skin, likely some that she peeled off. And when the results of blood tests came clear as well, the physician tried to explain to her that this was a mental disorder and recommended a psychiatric evaluation. However, she was completely convinced that the parasites were real. So, when the doctors didn't agree with her evaluation, she stopped responding and didn't go through with any treatment for her condition. Hopefully, that woman received the medical attention she needed and is now living without this excruciating disorder. Though, given how she responded upon first learning the truth, I highly doubt that's the case.
If it was me, I'm taking the doctor's advice and going through like a mental evaluation because it'd be scary just peeling off skin trying to get insects out of your body, but you're really making bad marks like this. Like you said, I hope she did get treatment.
Visual agnosia. Visual agnosia is a rare vision-related disorder where the affected individual has trouble recognizing objects. They can still technically see something that's in front of them, but they can't identify what the object is, or at least identify it correctly.
I see colours, shapes, punctuated by faces, the faces of people which I really recognise, and they stand out much more than anything else. That's why I can't read words or read music anymore. So I still can imagine what it looks like in my mind's eye, but I can't imagine what it looks like, or I can't see what it looks like when I look at it. So essentially, I find things through colour.
Someone suffering from visual agnosia might see a chair and mistake it for a small child. Though this is an extreme example. In most cases, the patient often confuses an object with something of a similar general shape, like seeing a pink smartphone and believing that it's a bar of soap. There are also several subcategories of this disorder for people who have difficulty perceiving a certain type of object. People suffering from alexia, for example, cannot distinguish between different words and see all text as essentially the same thing. Similarly, patients with environmental agnosia have trouble recognizing their surroundings, which makes it almost impossible for them to go anywhere on their own. Visual agnosia is fascinating not just because of how it affects perception, but because it gives us a glimpse into the intricate workings of the brain and what happens when those processes break down. In rare cases, it can be triggered by trauma, such as a head injury or stroke. However, the more common cause is simply aging, particularly in conditions like dementia that impact the brain's ability to process and interpret visual information. It's not like the patient wakes up one day and is unable to recognize the objects around them. Instead, it starts off small, with occasional misidentifications before growing rapidly with age. And this is precisely what happens to the most popular case of visual agnosia, which was documented by the neurologist Oliver Sacks in his book titled The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. The title of the book is also in reference to the person suffering from visual agnosia, who Oliver referred to as Mr. P, who I'll just call Peter for simplicity's sake. Now, Peter was a singer and a musician who became a music teacher in his later years, and it was during his time at school that the first signs of his visual issues began to appear. Sometimes a student would stand in front of him and Peter wouldn't recognize them. More specifically, he wouldn't recognize the student's face. It would stay that way until the student spoke, at which point Peter could identify them by their voice. This often caused misunderstandings and frustrations for Peter, but he often laughed it off and didn't pay much attention to it. However, his situation became a whole lot worse as time went on. Not only was he failing to identify the faces around him, but he also began to see faces where there were none. It got to the point that on some occasions he patted things like fire hydrants and parking meters thinking that they were his students. But this blurring of reality didn't stop there. As the condition progressed, Peter became increasingly delusional. He began speaking to ornate carvings on chairs, expecting a response, and expressing surprise when none came. This went on for nearly 3 years as Peter kept ignoring the issue and deluding himself into thinking that it was normal. And it wasn't until Peter developed diabetes and sought help from an ophthalmologist, concerned that his eyesight might be failing, that the truth came out. Fortunately, after hearing Peter's bizarre and fragmented descriptions of his vision, the ophthalmologist realized the problem wasn't with Peter's eyes, but with his brain. He referred Peter to Oliver Sacks for further diagnosis. Upon his visit, Oliver gave him a National Geographic magazine and asked him to describe what he saw in it. According to the case report, Peter was able to discern finer details like colors, brightness, and shapes of objects in a scene. But when asked to describe the scene as a whole, his mind drew a blank. However, the most bizarre part of his visit came near the end when Peter was about to leave. He reached out and grabbed the head of his wife, who came with him, and tried to put her on his head. In other words, Peter had just misidentified his own wife as a literal hat. This confirmed beyond a doubt that Peter was dealing with visual agnosia. And unfortunately, while the diagnosis was accurate, Oliver had no treatment to offer that could improve his condition. With no other choice, Peter adapted by relying on his other senses to recognize people for the rest of his life. It goes to show just how adaptable humans are, even when faced with something as terrifying as visual agnosia.
Yeah, that is true. If there ain't no treatment plan, you might as well adapt to what your condition is until you leave this earth, basically. We probably have the right technology now to treat something like this, but back then it seemed like it was hard.
Truman Show delusion. Truman Show delusion is an exceedingly rare and fairly recent mental disorder where the patient believes that they're the protagonist of a reality TV show. In their minds, the world around them is nothing more than an elaborate set with hundreds of hidden cameras to capture their reaction to various events. The name of the disorder comes from the 1998 movie starring Jim Carrey called The Truman Show. For those who haven't seen it, the plot of the movie revolves around Truman, who's adopted by a corporation at birth. This corporation then builds a secluded island with thousands of cameras and broadcasts every second of Truman's life for the whole world to see. Now, there are some differences between individual cases, but for the most part, almost all patients believe that they're the real-life version of Truman. When asked, this is how one of the people suffering from the delusion described their mindset. I realized that I was and am the center, the focus of attention by millions and millions of people. My family and everyone I knew was and are actors in a script, a charade whose entire purpose is to make me the focus of the world's attention. Medically, the Truman Show delusion is a symptom of psychosis and can also serve as an early sign of schizophrenia. And while there have been many cases of this delusion over the years, few are as significant as Albert's. Albert was a 26-year-old from western Pennsylvania who was leading a fairly normal life. He worked at a nearby assembly plant and lived with his parents. But one day in 2002, he decided to travel to New York and tried to enter the United Nations building. When a guard stopped him from going any further, he punched the guard and was later taken to the Bellevue Psychiatric Hospital. And that's where Joel Gold, who was a psychiatrist, and Ian Gold, who worked as a neurophilosopher, discovered the truth about Albert's condition. As it turns out, Albert believed that he was the main character of his very own TV show, and everyone around him, including his parents, were nothing more than actors. He also revealed that the showrunners were watching his every move through tiny wireless cameras that were implanted in his eyes. His delusion got to the point where he believed that the 9/11 incident was just a staged plot twist to make the show more interesting. And before getting arrested, he was trying to escape the show by asking the UN for help, which is why he traveled over 200 miles to New York City. Albert was later identified as the first documented case of a newly recognized mental disorder, eventually named Truman Show delusion. The Gold brothers have since diagnosed several hundred people with the same delusional disorder. And sadly, as cameras become smaller and surveillance more widespread, it's hard to imagine the frequency of these cases decreasing anytime soon.
If somebody was going through that disorder, I would classify it more as a paranoid schizophrenic. But anyway, that's going to be it for now. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications for more Chilling Scares content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Corner channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor. I say that's a wrap, and have a nice day, everybody.